Welcome back. I'm Ken. We're visiting with Mike. Mike, I'm looking forward to know where we're headed from here. You've had some wonderful leadership gold ideas, common denominators in different organizations, very different leaders. Where do we go from here?
Well, until now, the cases that we looked at, it was kind of essentially how do you get started? What does it require from the leader, and what other kinds of activities that the leaders would enter into that would get the organization going? But once it started, it's not necessarily smooth sailing. Uh, there's always bumps on the road, potholes. And those potholes are key because how the leadership responds to those challenges will really set the tone in the rest of the organization. People are watching how are we going to handle this? How is he going to do that? So it's a challenge. And going back to Nehemiah, for example, there's two episodes that are very indicative of how he handled the problem. One of them was when the people outside of Jerusalem were threatening them to come and do a job on them, kind of thing. And in chapter 4, verse 14, he says, when I saw their fear. So obviously it was more that I heard, but more I saw, I use first-hand, again, observation. The second one is that all the people are working on the wall, but in the meantime, bills have to be paid, debts have to be reimbursed, and the people then are complaining because if they don't pay the debt, guess what? They'll take their whatever they've got left, wives, kids, whatever. Um, so there again in chapter 5, verse 6, it says, when I heard their outcry. So what I'm trying to say that is that he had real-time knowledge of what was happening. Not 6 months ago, not a report or anything like that. He saw it, he heard it. And the reason he was able to do that, in verse 16 in chapter 5, it says, I also applied myself to the work, and all my servants were together for the work. So the point was he was in there with his sleeves rolled up, pitching in and doing what he's capable of doing, whatever that was. So his response in each of those situations was rather swift and addressed the situation, the problems. So again, the key thing is, are you getting real-time knowledge, not reports, but knowledge? And you can see that also in all of the other books that we looked at. When we looked at Escalante and his teaching in the Los Angeles school, if somebody was absent, he didn't wait until the end of the semester. He went there the next day or after class to find out, hey, where were you and what's happening and stuff like that. If you had no homework turned in, you got feedback right away. Lateness, again, was addressed. So there was really some real-time feedback involvement. The same thing with Ono, when he was on the floor and yelling at somebody and throwing parts around. Guess what? That's that's real time. It's not at the end of the week we'll clean the place up kind of thing. No, now kind of thing. So it shows a certain immediacy as to addressing problems, and it's key because people, not that they're looking for excuses, but their motivation is greatly affected by the environment in which they work. And if they get the feeling that, guess what, nobody cares, and we're okay, shrug our shoulders, so that's the way life is, and as long as I get my paycheck at the end of the week, so be it, kind of thing. So when you have that kind of situation, it's very difficult well, it's more than difficult. It's dismal when the leadership ignores the problems because everybody knows them. And it's more than just in those books. Recently, when in some of the consulting that I did, the place had a terrible track record with turnover and absenteeism. And the general attitude was, that management doesn't care, and why should I care? And that's the way it is. So we'll do the best. So you're missing one of your teammates. Guess what? Well, I guess we'll work with one less, kind of thing. So it affects the whole organization, uh, and again, the responsive management is key. Uh, so then how do you solve absenteeism? How do you solve employee turnover? That's a whole different issue, kind of thing. So it's a tough thing. The thing that I find is that Gallup raised that last week with the Q12. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it, but there were a few things that I think is important that underscore what I'm talking about. And with the million plus surveys in a lot of organizations, yeah, it's worth to pay attention and see what they have to say.
Not only did I take a look, Mike, I put a link in the description for last week's video.
Okay.
Because you're mentioning it now, I'll put the link again in this
Yeah,
week's description.
I agree with it, even though I had nothing to do with it. And the first one, the first thing that they have in there, I know what's expected of me at work. So expected of me means probably a couple of things. One is, do you have the skills and can you do what you would like to do or expected to do? And also, do I know what needs to be produced? And I think I mentioned to you before, one time I was in Montreal in Canada, and the employees were coming an hour and a half earlier than production control and didn't know for an hour and a half what they were supposed to do for the day. So, how can you get people motivated and say, oh, I really have to produce and do something if you don't know what's expected or if you don't have the skills? And I remember one other place, I saw a lady operating a machine, and then there's error 32. So I looked at her, and she just ignored it and kept on going. So when she had a break, I said to her, what does error 32 mean? She said, I don't know, but it doesn't bother me. So here's you have a person who's supposed to be the expert in the operation of that machine, not trained adequately to be able to interpret and to produce the kind of stuff that's needed. So it seems rather obvious, but surprisingly, it's very difficult for people to be charged up if they feel that, well, I'll see what happens. The second thing that they have is, I have the materials and equipment I need to do my work right. Well, you'd be surprised how many times people are expected to produce certain things and they don't have the raw materials to do it or the instructions to do it. And I've seen that in a number of places. So there again, if you don't have the material and the equipment, what are you, what are you supposed to do? You just wait, exactly. You shrug your shoulders and say, okay, we'll see. Um, so that you have there a challenge not only for the management, but for the supervision. Because one of the things that I look at is when I visit the place is see how the startup is, and do the people have what they need to operate right away. And some places it buzzes right away, everything is there. And some other places you wait for this, you wait for that, you've got the wrong part for this, and again, how can you ask people, hey, we need to produce and let's get rid of waste when, there are things beyond their control that they have to live with, work around it. And then the third area is at work, I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day, which ties in with all the other things we just talked about. Is say, well, everybody likes to succeed, or I like to have something that they feel is meaningful. And if we deprive them of that, guess what? It's very hard to be motivated. So when you look at those kinds of questions, you have a very shocking realization when you look at uh, how many people are engaged or not engaged. And the key thing is that when you have engaged employees, they found that they're 18% more productive in sales, as an example. They have 23% higher profitability when you have a workforce that's engaged. You have 78% less absenteeism. In other words, if you feel that what you need is that what you do is important, guess what? You feel guilty if you don't show up. But if today is nice, not necessarily today, but maybe tomorrow, and then it's sunny, well, I'll take the day off, kind of thing. I'll go and play golf, whatever, whatever you like, So absenteeism goes down, and employee turnover goes down. So the whole idea is how do you get people engaged? And the benefits are endless. Quality improves, customer satisfaction improves, all kinds of things. And while I'm using those things in business, I would assume that the same principles apply, say, in family relationships. Like, for instance, if you're a father, are you involved with your kids' life? How are you plugging into there? And in some ways, I cringe when I say that because my background before I went into teaching was in management consulting. And I was always on the road. You go where the customer is. The customer doesn't come to your house. So I ended up all over the place, from Singapore to Rome to whatever. Whatever the business was, that's where I went. So if it's in Rio, well, we'll go to Rio, which I did a few times. So the point is that I was not involved as much as I should have been with my kids for reasons, and that's why essentially I gave up the consulting and went into teaching was not my first choice. It was not even on my radar. But I told a friend at church I like to get involved in some ministry. And he was quite wired into the business Christian ministry community things and involved in missions. He asked me if I was serious, and I said yes. So he said, okay. And then the next thing I know is I get a phone call from Trinity Weston. So the point is that the involvement, the engagement of the boss, of the father, of the husband uh, is crucial. Another interesting statistics, uh, in Japan, uh, retirement is really at an earlier age. And suddenly the housewife finds her husband under her feet all the time. And what happens is, and eventually you get a higher rate of divorce for people who are retired.
Wow.
Why? Because her husband hasn't been part of her life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Gone most of the time.
yeah, so the whole thing is that how do you how do you look at what your where's your treasure is, and
Hmm.
which was the thing we talked about last week.
Hmm.
So if your job is the end all, like it was for me with consulting, then something has to give. And the question really is that thing that you're really willing to give up on not that important, or do you have to make some fine tuning and sometimes radical tuning to be able to affect the issue? And in some ways, you see that a little bit with the youth right now, where the kids are not really, or the parents, I should say, are not really uh, involved in their kids' lives as much as they probably should be.
Hmm.
When I hear of a crime taking place at 2 o'clock in the morning by a 15-year-old, my reaction is, where are the parents? And maybe what I shouldn't say even to the parents, because there's probably a single parent kind of a situation. Um, so the principles that we're talking about here are more than just business. Business gets the spotlight because that's where the most of the research that I've seen that helps me to make some rationale about how do you change things, how do you improve things. Uh, so that's the key thing that I wanted to say today is that the motivation of the leader in addressing issues and the timeliness in the way that they address them and the way that they address them makes a big difference. I remember one plant in San Francisco. We'd been working there for a while, and they had made great improvements in productivity. And the production manager comes to me and says, I've got a problem. I said, right now, the orders on the books, it was just before Christmas. The orders on the books just doesn't justify staying open between Christmas and New Year's. We've got so much inventory right now that we should shut down. What do I tell them? Because how do you say thank you? But guess what? We're closing the place down. So I said, well, you have to tell them the truth. You got to. So he went over there and addressed the people. And after he was finished, he got a big applause. He came back to the office and he says, I don't get it. They applauded with bad news. So I said, well, there's always somebody in a place that is known for knowing what's happening. In this case, it was the cleaning lady. So I said, why don't you go and ask her what was going on? Well, she says it's very simple. You're the first person who told us the truth. So you see the ramification of those things, that sometimes we have a tendency to avoid uh, disappointments or situations. And in some ways, I feel that's the same thing about the situation in politics with Iran and the previous presidents. All they're trying to do is to appease them instead of facing the issue. And you get, it's like they say in what's the term in football that kick the ball, you know, can't think of the term now. When you're passing the puck kind of a thing, you just quick kick the ball further, and then we'll face that when that comes back. Anyway, so that's what I had for today.
Let me give a recap. We're
Yes,
about out of time. It's not only essential for the leader at the beginning to be present
yes,
in person, eyes and ears, assessing the situation. It's
yes,
also important for the leader to be present where the work is being done or
yes,
where the rubber meets the road in a family, for
yes,
instance.
yes,
Eyes and ears to deal with situations that arise immediately, not let it
yes,
go, because
yes,
everyone in the organization is watching and knows how the
yes,
leader handles situations that arise. And it's either a morale crusher or a morale builder for the
yes,
leader to handle these situations. Now, depending on the problem, you handle it different ways. That's not what we're
yes.
talking about. What we're talking about today is it's absolutely essential for the leader to be right there, eyes and ears, using firsthand knowledge and not waiting to deal with situations.
Yeah, you have to be responsive to whatever is happening, and you cannot be responsive unless you have first-hand knowledge.
And if you do, sometimes you get applause. I
Yes.
love that story. Thank you for that. That was
When
great.
when was the last time you heard applauses for bad news kind of thing? No, But the point was to say, hey, guy, we appreciate it. We understand the situation, and yeah, that makes sense. But as much as we don't like it, it's what we need to do.
Yeah. So, any final comments? This has been great. Thank you very much for this visit.
Well, it's a challenge because it's a the leadership is very, very crucial. And with the advent, I go back again to my soapbox of the NBA syndrome. I think in the US and Canada and in Europe in some ways, Western, we've substituted our responsiveness to people who work for us or that we should be supporting and removing impediments. And we substituted for numbers, dollars and cents, the statistics, the analytical aspects of the situation. And the last part of the handling the human dimension is really lacking. I can't remember seeing any MBA program that had a substantive element of human factors and human, we get our organizational behavior and we get motivational theory and stuff like that, but it's not part of the agenda. The agenda, you got to produce the numbers.
So that
You
philosophy of leadership is responsive immediately, but they're responsive to numbers, not necessarily to people in real situations.
Yes, knowing the numbers is crucial, but the numbers are just an indicator of what's happening. So if you just stop with the numbers, you're failing. What you've got to do is to look behind the numbers and say, okay, what's the root cause behind those things? And how do we change things or improve things or help things? How do we eliminate impediments to be able to? And that's essentially what Gosen, what Nissan said. He said, hey, I'm here to resolve problems that you have. You have problems, you tell me, and we'll get it fixed. And it was the same thing with Giuliani. Yeah, he said he went into cop cars, and if he saw certain things, he changed the way the system worked to be able to resolve those issues in a timely fashion. So it's a hard sell because you've got to get out of your mahogany row and your reclining chair and whatever else, and that's not where you'll get the greatest impact. And the whole thing goes back to, in some ways, the leverage. What the leader has is to leverage the resources that he's got, or she has. And so if you have 10 people pushing in the same direction, guess what? That's great. If you're the only one, I feel sorry for you.
It's going to be a lot harder.
Yes.
Okay, we're out of time. Thank you. Look forward to next visit.
And thank you for your patience. It was a challenge with the laptop this morning.
But we
Anyway,
got
that is
past it.
working.